They couldn't even bargain for things like their health care. They couldn't bargain for even their safety. They were just shut out. So I think we could talk about climate change. I have a son that's a scientist with NASA, and we were out at the last satellite launch in September, and this was in Lompoc, California, and I had the occasion to speak with a gentleman by the name of Torsten Marcus, and Torsten is the head of cryospheric research for NASA, and I asked him about climate change. He said, well, you can go to our website and you can see all the statistics we have. You know, we show our work. We can show how much the temperature of the globe is going up, and we can also show that the glaciers are melting. Well, I said, Torsten, I said, that's great. I said, how do I get this across to people that don't believe in climate change? He gave me a look. He said, you know what? He said, if these people don't believe in science, he says, there's nothing I can do for them. So we just got something on our infrastructure that we found out our roads, 7.5% of our roads were in poor condition here in Iowa, and 19.4% of our bridges were structurally deficient. So, and that's the third highest in the nation. That's because we would rather give the 1% tax breaks than fix our infrastructure. We'd rather give the 1% tax breaks than fund our education system. And we would rather give the 1% tax breaks rather than fund Medicaid for our most vulnerable citizens. So I'm here today because I think we need someone who can be flexible, but it has been consistent on their core values. Someone who recognizes that healthcare should be a right and not a luxury.
Right.
Someone who understands that spending on education is an investment, and who understands that labor rights and spending on infrastructure can move us from the wage stagnation that we've seen over the last 40 years. And finally, someone who understands that climate change is a threat to all of us on this planet.
Yeah. And
all we have to do is look out here to the Mississippi River. For over 2 months, we were at major flood stage this year. Last week, it was 90 degrees in Anchorage, Alaska. We are denying climate change in the face of, I think we're being hit over the head with a proverbial baseball bat. And it's, you know, I don't know if I'm going to be alive to see the major changes that this planet's going to go through. But I know it's going to affect my children and my grandchildren. And God, I hope that I have somebody beyond my grandchildren. I have great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren. That's a roll of the dice right now. So I think that we need someone who doesn't just talk about all of the things that I just talked about over an election cycle or when it's convenient, but someone who has fought for these issues for decades. And that's why I am going to formally endorse Bernie Sanders for President of the United States. And regardless of what our Iowa legislature does, he's going to be the guy that at least makes things better until we get our heads. I'm trying. I'm trying here. But out of a dark, smelly place. And finally realize that we need people in politics that actually like government, not people in government that hate government. This is the problem that we have. What happens, we have people that hate government, they screw it up like they did with Medicaid, and then they say, you know what, government doesn't work. And this is after their screw-ups. So this seems like a real no-brainer to me. I think we don't need any more centrists. We need somebody that's got a backbone and that has fought for these issues and will fight for many more. And I think that we're very lucky today in Fort Madison, Iowa, to have somebody like Bernie Sanders come and address us. And I hope you got, I hope you sign up and help us out here. Help Bernie out, help him get elected, help guys like me get elected. We want a real revolution, not just in Fort Madison, not just in Iowa, but in this country. So tell your friends, tell your loved ones, tell everybody that you can think of that this is the most important election in our lifetime. You hear that every election. It really is this time. So, and we've got some great staffers here. Check with them so that if you want to volunteer for the campaign, we can always use volunteers. Let's see, some of the other things that we've got great union members here today. Talk to them. And talk to me. Give me. I'm on Facebook. I've got a website. If you need anything, I'm handling constituent issues. I'm going to be in touch with the campaign this whole time. I'll guarantee you that I doubt if we're going to get the best coverage, but let's make sure it's fair. Let's make sure everything that is said is fair, and let's elect Bernie this time. Yeah. So is anybody as hot as I am? It's pretty up here. I think that with the issues, we've got issues locally, we've got issues on the state level, we got issues nationally. But with your help and with everybody's help, I think we're going to be all right. I think that we're going to go through a rough patch, but we'll be all right. So, does anybody have any questions or anything?
Jeff? How do you see us finding a pathway back to having the rights reinstalled in Iowa?
The way that we're going to, the question was, how do we see a path towards workers' rights? And I think the only way that I can answer that is elect more of us in the House and the Senate and get rid of the governor that we've got right now. Because I think we definitely need to get rid of right to work. We need to restore Chapter 20 to what it was. We need more protections on the federal level too. We've had wage stagnation. If you look at graphs, you'll see back to about the Carter era, all the way forward, productivity has gone through the roof. But now, over the last 40 some odd years, the wage growth is just flatlined. I mean, if it was electrocardiogram, it would be just, the patient would be dead. And that's affected not only people in this country, it's affected the people in this state. It's affected the people in this state probably more than the people in this country. And it's affected southeast Iowa even more than the people in this state. We've had job loss from terrible trade agreements. Was it last week that we did the NAFTA? NAFTA rally?
Weeks ago, we had the NAFTA.
Yeah, we did a NAFTA rally in NAFTA 2.0 rally in Keokuk last week. And it was mainly, we talked about drug prices. If this NAFTA 2.0, if that passes, we're going to have permanently high drug prices. If this NAFTA 2.0 passes, we've got actual labor protections in the agreement. The only thing is, we don't have any provisions to enforce these agreements. And you know what happens if you've got if you've ever worked in a contract and there's no mechanism to enforce the provisions of that contract, then you really don't have a contract. So I know we had the Iowa Farmers Union here too. There's a lot of provisions in this agreement that favor agribusiness, but are just hell on the family farm. And so things like that, I think we need better trade agreements. On a federal level, we need somebody with a little bit of backbone to reverse this last horrible Supreme Court decision that decided that public workers, they automatically have right to work all around the country. We need to reverse that. We need to make sure that people can join a union.
That's right. Right to work's wrong.
Yeah, they can enjoy high wages. They can have time off. They can make enough money to have time off to enjoy their families. There's so many places right now that have forced overtime. That our parents you've got parents working 2 jobs and both of them are working overtime. So there's a lot of things that really we can do as far as workers' rights. So is there anything else? Well, I'm thinking that Senator Sanders should be here pretty soon. Is he here? Oh, okay. Well, like I said, thank you for coming today, and we will start our program here pretty soon. Thank you. Speak of the devil. It's my pleasure to endorse publicly and introduce the next President of the United States, Bernie Sanders.
Thank you all very much for coming out. Jeff, thank you so much for the great work you're doing here in Iowa and for your endorsement. Much appreciated. And thank all of you for coming out on this beautiful, cool day. Let me begin by apologizing. We're going to have to race out of here at 1:30 in order to catch a plane back to Vermont. So the main point that I want to make today is to talk about issues that other candidates don't really talk about much, and you're not going to see much about in the media. And that is that for the last 45 years in this country, the richest country in the history of the world, we've been seeing something really strange happening. And that we have seen a massive attack against the working class of this country. All right? We have seen efforts to break unions, We've seen efforts to throw millions of people off the health care that they have. We've seen efforts to refuse to raise the minimum wage to a living wage. And what our task right now is to make it very clear that the working class of this country is sick and tired of working 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet, sick and tired of seeing their kids, in many respects, have a lower standard of living than they do, and very sick and tired of seeing almost all new income and wealth created in America going to the top 1%. Now, the media doesn't talk about it, we don't talk about it in Congress, but this campaign will talk about the immorality of 3 people in America owning more wealth than the bottom half of the American people. The immorality of the top 1% owning more wealth than the bottom 92%. The immorality of the very rich getting richer while 500,000 Americans, including 30,000 veterans, will be sleeping out on the streets of this country tonight. This is America. We could do a heck of a lot better than that. Yeah. And I want to say a word about one area where we can and must do a lot better than we are doing right now, and that is the need to end the dysfunctional healthcare system that currently exists. And here is what we have right now. We have a system in which 34 million Americans have no health insurance. We have a system in which more than 50 million Americans are underinsured with high deductibles and high co-payments. And what that means is that you got 84 million people who hesitate to go to the doctor when they should. And then you got millions more who do go to the doctor, who end up in the hospital and are scared to death that the bill that they get from the hospital is going to bankrupt them or set them back financially for years. This is America. You should not have to suffer a financial disaster in your family because you got sick. We are going to do what every other major country on earth does, and that is to guarantee health care to all people as a human right, not a privilege. Well, in the arguments, we're being attacked by the special interests in healthcare. And let me tell you what this debate is really about. It is very hard for my opponents, whether they are Donald Trump, whether they are the Republican Party, whether the drug companies or the insurance companies, to defend the current system. They can't defend the current system because you cannot defend a system in which so many people are uninsured and underinsured when we pay the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs, and at the end of the day we spend almost twice as much per person on health care as do the people of any other country. How can you defend that? And you can't. What this debate is really about is whether we are prepared to take on the greed of the pharmaceutical industry, an industry which charges us the highest prices in the world, an industry which creates a situation where 1 out of 5 Americans cannot fill the prescriptions their doctors write, an industry which creates a situation where in Iowa and in Vermont and all over this country, elderly people have to cut their pills in half because they cannot afford the medicine they need. And at the end of all of that, last year, the pharmaceutical industry made $69 billion in profit. So we say to the pharmaceutical industry, you will stop ripping off the American people. Next week, I'm going to be on a bus with a bunch of people who are dealing with diabetes. And diabetes, as you know, is a growing problem in America. And we're going to go from Detroit, Michigan to Windsor, Ontario. Anyone know why we're going to Windsor, Ontario? It's a very nice city, but that's not why we're going. We're not sightseeing. We're going to Windsor in order to buy insulin for people in America who are suffering with diabetes. And what we will find, believe it or not, is that in Canada, insulin is sold for 1/10 the price that it's sold in America. We have people who die in this country because they cannot afford insulin. And today we tell the drug companies, we will not allow you to kill Americans because of your excessive greed. That is going to end. So what this debate is really about, it's not whether the current healthcare system works. Nobody believes it works. Nobody believes it works for ordinary Americans. The question is whether we have the courage to take on the very, very powerful pharmaceutical industry and insurance companies. And these people, over a 20-year period, have spent hundreds of millions of dollars buying politicians with their campaign contributions. They have spent billions of dollars on lobbying, making sure that they can do virtually anything they want. And we are going to tell them that their day is done. They're not going to get away with that anymore. Now, the other point that I think somebody from the media just asked me this question a moment ago. He said, well, is it practical? Is it practical to move to Medicare for all? My response is that it is totally impractical not to move to Medicare for all. But it's too hard, I am told. It is too hard to make this change in our healthcare system. Really? I want you to think back to 1965. In 1965, what the United States government did when Lyndon Johnson was president, what they said in that year is that our seniors desperately need public health insurance. And in 1965, they created Medicare, which today is the most popular health insurance program in this country, which is serving our seniors very, very well. They did that in 1965. They created a whole new program without the technology that we have today. So please don't anybody tell me that over a 4-year period, which is what our legislation does, that we cannot provide health care to all when 54 years ago they started in an entirely new program and implemented it in 1 year. So this is what our program does. I want everybody to be clear about it. Because you're going to hear a whole lot of misinformation coming from every direction. This is what our Medicare for All program does. In the first year, it says that we will lower the eligibility age for Medicare from 65 to 55. And you got a lot of folks out there today in Iowa and Vermont, they are desperate for Medicare. They are 62 years old. They are sick. They cannot get the health care that they need. We are going to lower that eligibility age from 65 to 55. In year one. And I'll tell you what else we're going to do. Medicare is a strong program. It is an excellent program from seniors, but we have got to improve Medicare for people 65 or older. Today, Medicare does not cover dental care, does not cover hearing aids, does not cover eyeglasses. And you got a lot of seniors out there who cannot afford to deal with the high cost of dental care to buy the hearing aids or the glasses that we need. What our Medicare for All proposal does is expand Medicare coverage for seniors to cover dental care, hearing aids, and eyeglasses. We do that in year one. In year two, we go from 55 down to 45. Year three, 45 down to 35. And by the fourth year, we will cover every man, woman, and child in this country with the human right of health. And we are also going to cap the amount of money that anybody in this country spends for prescription drugs at $200. And we do that because we're going to lower the cost of prescription drugs by having Medicare negotiate prices. We're going to do that by looking at the averages around the world, what other countries are paying. And when you as taxpayers put money into the development of new drugs, the drug companies are going to charge us reasonable prices. They're not going to rip us off. So this campaign, with your support, this campaign is finally going to do what people like FDR in the 30s talked about, Harry Truman talked about, John F. Kennedy talked about. Finally, we are going to do what every other major country on earth does and make health care a human right, not a privilege. You know, yesterday we had a panel discussion on health care. And the horror stories that we hear are just not worthy of a great country like ours. So with your support, and with your willingness to stand with me to take on the drug companies and the insurance companies, we are going to pass Medicare for All. But Medicare for All is not the only issue out there. One of the other major issues, when we look at the decline of the working class, when we look at 40 million people living in poverty, what we believe is that if you work 40 hours a week, you deserve a living wage, $15 an hour. And what the power of the people is about is that 4 years ago, some of you may recall, because I know we got a lot of people here who supported me 4 years ago. 4 years ago when I came here and I said we got to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, people said, Bernie, you are crazy. You can't more than double the minimum wage. Well, let me tell you what has happened, because the American worker has stood up and said we're tired of starvation wages. The result of that grassroots effort is that over a 4-year period, 7 states have in fact raised the minimum wage to $15 an hour. And last week, the United States House of Representatives raised that minimum wage to $15 an hour. So 4 years ago, they told us it could not be done. Well, it is being done right now. All right? 4 years ago, they told us that when I talked about making public colleges and universities tuition-free, too radical an idea, can't happen. Well, just last week, the University of Texas at Austin, free tuition for families under $65,000. New York University Medical School, free tuition for those people going to NYU Medical School. Tennessee, other states moving boldly in making public colleges and universities tuition-free. Of course we can do that. Of course we must do that. And it's not just the college education. There are a lot of young people who don't want to go to college. They want other jobs out there. They need the training and the skills in order to go out and get that job as a sheet metal worker or a plumber or a carpenter and make it into the middle class. We will provide that training free of charge as well. Back in 2008, all of 11 years ago, the United States Congress, against my vote, provided $700 billion in the largest bailout in American history for the crooks on Wall Street. And trillions of dollars in zero-interest loans from the Federal Reserve. My view is that if we can bail out the people on Wall Street who helped destroy the economy, we can certainly cancel student debt for 45 million Americans. We have a generation of young people who were told, you've got to go to college. They didn't have a lot of money, so they borrowed the money to go to college. And some of them left school, some of them dropped out of school, some of them graduated. $50,000, $100,000 in debt. Some of them went to medical school, law school, leaving $200,000, $300,000 in debt. And some of those people today are so deeply in debt they can't afford to get married, can't have kids, can't buy a home, can't even buy a car. If we can bail out Wall Street, if we can give $1.5 trillion in tax breaks under Trump to the top 1% and large private corporations, you know what? We can cancel student debt in this country. And I say to the brothers and sisters in the trade union movement, some of whom are here today, thank you very much for making sure that workers can engage in collective bargaining and earn decent wages and decent benefits. In my humble opinion, the future of the middle class rests on expanding the trade union movement. We've got to make it easier, not harder, for workers to join unions. We have introduced legislation that I will fight for as president that says if 50% of workers in a unit plus one sign a card saying they want to join a union, they will have a union. And we're going to do away with anti-union so-called right-to-work legislation, which is hurting so many workers all over the country. And there's another issue which is not an Iowa issue, it's not a Vermont issue, it is not even an American issue. It is a global issue. And we have got to understand that under the presidency of the most dangerous president in the modern history of this country, we have got to explain to Donald Trump, the great scientist, self-described great scientist, that it is not wind turbines that cause cancer, but in fact that climate change is real, that the scientists are telling us that we have fewer than 12 years to aggressively transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy, or else there will be irreparable damage done to this planet. Not America, not just America, but the whole planet. And already you are reading about heat waves, not just in the United States, but in Europe, but in India, but in Australia, but in Latin America. And that means it's going to be harder for farmers in Iowa and farmers all over the world to grow the crops that feed us. There will be more floods, more droughts, more extreme weather disturbances. There will be more rising sea levels, which mean if we don't get our act together, cities like Miami, Florida, will be partially underwater in 40 or 50 years. That's true of coastal cities all over the world. What we are fighting for here is not just ourselves. We are fighting to make sure that our children and grandchildren and future generations have a planet that is healthy and is habitable, and we cannot afford to fail in this struggle. Today we say to the fossil fuel industry, I want you just to think about it for a second. Think about it for a second. You got a fossil fuel industry that makes tens of billions of dollars in profits. They get huge subsidies from the federal government. They get all kinds of tax breaks from the federal government. And what they are doing is destroying our planet. And what we are saying to the fossil fuel industry, sorry, your short-term profits are not more important than the future of this planet. And when we say that, by the way, let us be clear, we're going to create millions of good-paying and union jobs as we transform our energy system away from fossil fuel. And that is also true with the need to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure. Step out of the box. This is the United States of America, the wealthiest country in the history of the world. When you turn on your water faucet, you should be able to drink clean water. We need to rebuild our roads and our bridges and our airports. And we need an improved rail system, which will help us in the fight for climate change. Let me just conclude by saying this. This is a tough time for our country because we are dealing with a president who is a pathological liar. And it's very hard to deal with somebody who's a pathological liar because he changes his view every single day. But this is what I do want to say to the people of Iowa, because I know that Iowa voted for Donald Trump. And I want you to think back to the 2016 election. When Donald Trump came here to Iowa and he said, you elect me, I'm going to provide health care to everybody. You remember that? Everybody. Well, this is the same president that led the effort to try to throw 32 million Americans off the health care that they have. This is a candidate, when he ran for president, who said, I have a tax plan, and we're going to implement a tax plan. It's not going to, well, benefit billionaires like me. It's going to benefit ordinary Americans. Please understand, people of Iowa, that he lied. 83% of the benefits over a 10-year period of his tax plan go to the top 1%. That's not benefiting the middle class. Trump told the people of Iowa and the people of America that if elected, he would be a different type of Republican. He would not cut Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. Remember that? He lied. Take a look at his budget. Massive cuts, $1.5 trillion to Medicaid. What a disaster that would be in the fight against opioid addiction. $840 billion cut over a 10-year period to Medicare and billions in cuts to Social Security. So we have got to expose Donald Trump for the liar that he is. And we have got to understand that what Trump is doing is not only lying, that's pretty bad, but what he is also doing in an unprecedented way in modern American history. He is not understanding that the function of a president of the United States is to bring our people together. That we are one people, whether we're black or white or Latino, Native American, Asian American, what we are Americans. Idea that we have a president, and it gives me no pleasure to say this, that we have a president who is a racist and is a bigot, is a disgrace in terms of American history. All right? This country deserves a president who is going to fight to end discrimination in America, not become a nation with more discrimination, not be a nation in which we demonize people because the color of their skin is different than ours. So we got a lot of work to do in front of us. And I appreciate so much that all of you are out here on this hot afternoon. And I know that you have friends out there when you go back and somebody says, what'd you do this afternoon? You say, well, I went to a Bernie Sanders rally. And they will say, you must be nuts. Why would you do a thing like that? Why would you be involved in politics? You could stay home and watch TV. And the answer that you know is that in this unprecedented moment in American history, it is not good enough to simply complain. It is not good enough to say, oh man, I'm really angry that I'm earning low wages, that I can't afford health care, that my kid can't go to college. I'm really worried about climate change, and I'm worried that women cannot control their own bodies, and I'm worried about all the discrimination we're seeing. I'm worried, worried, worried. Well, if they are worried, they're going to have to get involved in the political process, stand up and fight back. All of you know, every person here knows a very important lesson, not only of American history, but of world history. And that is that real fundamental change has never taken place from the top on down. It's not that some person in the White House says, oh gee, I got a good idea, we're going to end segregation in America. Oh, I got a good idea, we're going to make sure that workers can engage in collective bargaining. Oh, I got a great idea. I think we should end discrimination against gay people and allow for gay marriage in America. That is never how it happens. It always happens. Real change always happens from the bottom on up. That is the history of the trade union movement, where workers stood up and said they will not be treated like animals. They are entitled to be working with dignity and respect and engage in collective bargaining. That's the trade union movement. It's the history of the civil rights movement, where the African American community and their white allies said, we will end racism and segregation in America. It is the history of the women's movement. 100 years ago today, women did not have the right to vote. Women were not going to schools. Women could not go into higher education. Women were not getting the jobs they passionately wanted because of the grotesque level of sexism that existed. But women said loudly and clearly, and with their male allies, that women in America will not be second-class citizens. And they stood up and they fought that. And it's the same thing with the gay movement, where people were humiliated and beaten for the right to simply marry somebody they loved. And they fought and they won major victories there as well. So we are in a pivotal moment in history. Mark my words, that 20 or 30 years from today, after we pass Medicare for all, your grandchildren will say to you, hey, Grandma, was it really true that there was one time in American history when you were younger that people really could not go to the doctor when they were sick? I don't believe that, Grandma. Was it really true that people died because they didn't have the health care they needed? Was it true that people went bankrupt because they suffered a serious illness and ended up in the hospital? Grandma, that's not true. Well, it is true. And our job is to make sure that 30 years from now, people look back and say, that is not what America should have been, and our job now is to change all of that. We are the wealthiest country in the history of the world. All right, we're not a poor country. We are the wealthiest country in the history of the world. So please don't anybody tell me that we cannot afford to educate all of our kids, that we cannot afford to provide quality health care to all of our kids, that we cannot lead the world in fighting climate change, that we cannot make sure that every worker in America earns a living wage. We can do that and more if we have the determination to stand up to the greedy corporate elite who think they are entitled to everything. And what we are saying today, enough is enough. This country belongs to all of us, not just the 1%. Thank you all very much.
But